are in and out of an encounter, even though an individual FQHC would not be required to necessarily provide all of the services, but there needs to be a uniform list of what's in and out. So that is our update at the moment. Any other key points from the OMS team? Kristen, David, Peter?
I don't have anything at this time. I'm more interested in hearing questions and feedback.
So Sharon, good question on the, is it all visits related to crowns or just the lab costs? And my impression is that it would be the visits. Is there something you can speak to that?
It would be the lab costs. The visits themselves would still be the T1015.
Okay. So Kurt, question, what is included in non-physician provider? And again, that was in reference to how things are currently structured. I don't know, Kristen, if that's something that you can speak to, what types of providers might be included?
I believe that was in reference to like the general nursing services that weren't otherwise covered as part of an encounter previously.
Would it be possible to use a different term, because there are a number of PPS billable non-physicians, like a physician assistant or a nurse practitioner, or
yes. Yeah, that's a great question and point. I think in addition, it was related to the diabetes education type services, asthma education, non-physician providers. But yeah, we can certainly ensure that we clarify that further in the official guidance.
So I am looking in the chat and I'm seeing lots of people introducing yourselves. Thank you. Are there other questions that folks have about the in and out of the encounter? Yep, Charlie.
Oops, I don't want to jump in too quickly if other people have questions, but one in particular that I know is important to clarify going forward. It appears from the list that you have that you are not carving out behavioral health services, and in particular group therapy services. That is, I think, consistent with what my colleagues and I see as a very reasonable reading of the current rule, but we're also aware that there's been a lot of back and forth about that under the current rule, and different health centers treat it differently based on both different readings of the rule, but also differing advice over time from provider relations. So it's important, I think, for us to be clear and not just be silent with regard to that. When I saw that list, I thought, that's nice. Group therapy is in the T1015, but I just want to be sure that's what main care intends. And if not, as long as there's clarity one way or the other, that's really important going forward.
Yes, thank you for that comment. And again, I think the intent was not to exclude that. So we understand the need for clarity there. And it does seem like, Darcy, would you mind just pasting it one more time so that folks who joined later can see it in the chat?
Sure thing.
Thank you.
So there is another question in the chat from Lori. Says it sounds like the list of fee-for-service is the same as before, and can we clarify what the actual changes are? I can take that if you'd like, Jenny. So we were cautious in tying the current fee-for-service list as it stands in policy today to what the future implementation will be, because as most of you are probably aware, our current chapter 3 is a little bit out of date and doesn't include all instances of maybe intrauterine devices or long-acting contraceptive devices. So we tried to use a more general description and category of service, in that it will include additional IUD codes or long-acting contraceptives. There is also the addition of, as Jenny and Peter mentioned, the costs associated for labs for dentures and crowns will be carved out. And in addition, we're considering high-cost drugs, which was not considered before. That was previously included in the encounter.
Great, thank you, Kristen.
Hi, how are you treating vaccine-only visits?
Currently today or going forward?
Going forward.
So we're intending to keep those administration fees the same as we would today. So if it's a vaccine-only visit with a qualifying provider, it is reimbursed that. It could be reimbursed that encounter. If it is a non-qualifying provider, it could be reimbursed that $5 fee for service.
Does that, just out of curiosity, does that $5 fee for service line up with what you have in your state plan for the vaccines for children administration?
So that's a great question. I probably shouldn't have said $5. One of the clarifying points that we were intending to make today is that in terms of reimbursement for any of the fee-for-service services that we're intending to retain or carve out, going forward, the reimbursement rates for those services will align with our otherwise approved reimbursement rates. So we will align any reimbursement that is currently inconsistent with other areas of our benefits manual or state plan.
Kristen, this is Sharon. Does that mean that chapter 3 will just refer folks to other sections so that this section doesn't have to be reopened and updated with every change in sort of the physician schedule?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sharon. My goal, though we've not completely discussed it internally, would actually be to comprehensively describe the methodology in the chapter 2, which would include reference to those other areas of the benefits manual, and likely point providers to a fee schedule, as opposed to having to even promulgate a chapter 3 going forward. If that's not possible, that is dependent on, workload and time investment in those changes, both for policy and other units as well. So if in the event that that's not feasible, then yes, we would ultimately amend the chapter 3 to make reference to those other sections.
There are some new questions in chat.
Yep, I'm seeing the questions. Does align mean equate? Yes, align means equate. So we would be reimbursing equal to what a provider under another section would be reimbursed if it was a fee for service reimbursement. Sorry, close the chat. I know there's another one. What about in-house lab services? I think, and then flu and pneumovax vaccines. I think those are two separate questions. I think that Kristen answered the flu vaccine. Basically, I think if it were a fee for service, if it were not provided as part of a visit with a provider who qualified as a visit provider, then it would be, I think it would be the $5 unless there was some other reimbursement elsewhere in policy. Is that accurate, Kristen? I don't know the lab services. Is there someone who can answer that? I don't know the answer to that question.
Peter, is it correct that the in-house lab services will be considered part of the encounter?
You know what, we're going to have to take that one back.
And then I think there was a clarification of the question. I'm asking about the vaccine itself, not the administration. And this was for the flu and pneumonia vaccines?
I believe those are state supplied, are they not? Which means those wouldn't be reimbursed by main care. Is there
so the responses for adults, they're not state supplied?
So they're, generally speaking, when it is an adult, we only reimburse for, I believe it's the $5 administration fee, and under certain sections of policy, I do believe that we will reimburse the cost of the vaccine itself, but that's another question we'll have to take back and see if that current recommendation within other sections of policy would align here as well.
Yeah, and Lori, I think that really, I mean, obviously there's not a T1015 associated, you know, with the dose, you know, with the substance, but because the cost of acquiring it, you know, is something on your Medicare cost report that would be included, the cost of, and I'm blanking on the correct word for the substances, but not the right word, but you know what I'm talking about. What's in the syringe. The acquisition cost is in the cost report and therefore is in the rate. It's just that there isn't a T1015 visit associated with it if all that's being done in the visit is just vaccine administration. Does that make sense?
These are helpful questions. So thank you for the questions. Are there other questions?
And then back to the lab, and I could say a little bit more about that. It's somewhat analogous to what the response on the vaccine, in that, you know, a member goes in for a visit with the PCP or the NP, as the case may be. There's a T1015 visit and paid the rate. The lab, you know, you order a test and the lab is not another visit, but the lab costs are on the Medicare cost report and are therefore built into the rate.
So Peter, does that mean we would no longer be splitting labs done fee for service?
Can you say a little bit more about that, Jenka?
Sure. So if
you're
so if you're having a provider visit and say the provider does a point of care test for an A1C, what's happening in current state is you would bill that to the fee for service line, the A1C, and then the provider visit would go to your PPS line for section 31. So you're saying that would no longer be the case?
So when you say that you bill the A1C test itself under fee for service, what section of policy are you billing it under?
It's still going under the limited FFS section of section 31.
Ah, so is this, Kristen, is this a case of where it's something that we've got in Section 31 contracts right now, but it's just not showing up in the Chapter 3 because the Chapter 3 hasn't been updated in a number of years. And so
what code are you using to build
That would be 83036. And this is similar process to Medicare as well. So if a Medicare beneficiary had an encounter and they also had the same scenario happen, G0467 or whatever would be billed to the Medicare program, and then to Medicare B would be the 83036.
So I don't see that service code is in any of our fee-for-service contracts for FQHC. So you are actually receiving reimbursement on that today?
Yes.
Interesting.
And you're sure you're not billing it under a different enrollment, Jenka? Under a different section of policy?
I can double check because we do have a main lab as well. But generally this would be a point of care testing done at the location itself.
And so it's the blood draw and the analysis. That's what's
correct. If it was just venipuncture, it would fall inclusive to the T1015.
Okay.
That would be considered CLIA waived services.
Yes, they're CLIA waived.
Okay, thanks for raising this, Jenka. We will bring it back and take a look. And if you could email us or just text us, put it in the chat, that code number, that would help. Oh, Kristen, you wrote it down, right? Okay.
Does a similar situation, Jenka, exist for x-rays?
Yeah, we do bill fee for service for the technical component of x-rays as well.
And can you confirm that those service codes as well, Jenka, in just confirming that they are billed under the FQHC and not some other section of policy?
Can do, yep.
Thank you.
But yeah, it comes back to that the larger conceptual framework is there's not necessarily another, it doesn't trigger another T1015 visit, but the costs of it can be built into the rate if those costs aren't covered by a separate revenue stream. And that's sort of the concept that gets applied to everything where we're talking about it not triggering a T1015 visit.
And we have a clarifying question, I think, which is similar on the dental dentures and crowns. The cost of the dentures will be covered in the section 3. I think it should be section 31. That was our typo in our email, but the actual visit will be covered under the rate. Will each visit related to the dentures be reimbursed under the T1015 or just the first visit?
I think we're still discussing the components of the visits internally. Any other associated visits tied to the dentures?
And I think this falls under the fact that we don't have the list of codes yet, but we are working on that list of codes. I think once we have the list of codes ourselves, then that will be much clearer. But I think these questions are helpful in illustrating the need for that list. So I'm not seeing a lot more questions. Again, as I said at the outlet, it may have been before some folks had joined. There's still 3 FQHCs that Guidehouse is working with. And then there were a couple of follow-up questions that we are still working on based on Curtis's questions. So there may be some outreach from Guidehouse on specific questions, though I don't know if it's worthwhile to discuss it here, because it may be even more in the weeds.
Yeah, can I bring up another issue? Hopefully this is not one of those in the weeds and is more along the line of radiology and lab, which is DME.
Yep, no, it's helpful. Go ahead, Curtis, thank you.
So DME, durable medical equipment, how is that reimbursed, and would that be carved out just like lab and X-ray perhaps?
I think same question of whether or not there's a separate revenue stream to pay for the cost. And so, you know, certain low cost supplies that the FQHC, you know, has on hand in inventory at all times, you know, are considered incident to, and therefore the costs are definitely included in the numerator. You know, and so then, you know, if and I'll just pick a certain type of DME that I'm familiar with, but someone else tell me if there's a better example. But, you know, someone comes in with a sprained ankle, you know, there's an inflatable plastic cast, you know, that is something that isn't considered incident to per se. You know, it's something that your in-house pharmacy has on hand. And so the visit at which the inflatable cast was prescribed, the visit is a T1015 visit because it was with you know, an appropriate clinician. But then the DME itself, you know, would be reimbursable under the DME section of policy, because it in and of itself is not a visit. So that would not be an example of we're carving a visit out of a T1015 rate. It's just that the cost has a separate revenue stream under another section of policy.
Right, and so then are you carving that cost out of the calculation of the PPS rate per visit?
Yes, yes, and that would be consistent with the recommendation that Darcy had sent on your behalf, Kurt. I mean, do you agree that it would be?
I don't know how DME is paid. I just, that's another item from the cost report. So lab and radiology, which has already been discussed. I think there's some follow-up. But if DME is, someone has to tell me if it is separately reimbursed outside the visit, then yes, it falls under that same principle.
And to get a little bit down into the weeds without going too much in the weeds, I mean, that email that Darcy, you had sent a couple of weeks ago that included 11 lines from the Medicare cost report that Kurt had flagged was really, really helpful. And, you know, we really want to thank you, Kurt, for flagging that for us. And it really called our attention to the fact, as we started looking across different FQHC's Medicare cost reports, that CMS really, you know, it's while the form is consistent and prescribed, CMS allows a certain degree of discretion in what gets placed on a certain line and what it is called. And so there is some ambiguity on the Medicare cost reports, in addition to the fact that there is some uniformity from one FQHC to the next. There is also an extent of lack of uniformity because CMS allows it. And so that has raised some questions about, gosh, well, when we look at what this one FQHC called something on a certain line, what are those costs? And is it appropriate to include those costs in the numerator, or should they be moved elsewhere because it's not really related to patient care? And you know, marketing and fundraising would be an example where yes, that's a real cost, but it's not really related to the patient care, and so that should not be included in the T1015 reimbursement. So there's a clear example, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with, oh, is there a separate revenue stream to cover it? But then there are services like you're mentioning, you know, DME, lab radiology, where there's that question of, is it more appropriate to cover that using a separate revenue stream, given how main care pays for those services? And so over the coming week, we might need to reconnect with you, Kurt and Darcy, you know, to talk through some of those weedy issues. And all of that really came up thanks to the email that you sent, Kurt. So that's really, yeah, that's one of the things that we really, as Jenny had mentioned at the top, we really want to get this right. Because if we really aren't doing very careful work and inadvertently build a cost into the T1015 that's paid for elsewhere, you know, we could have a real problem with CMS. So we really just need to be very careful and understanding, you know, line by line, what costs are included in those sort of more ambiguous lines of the Medicare cost reports.
Sure. And first of all, let me just assure you that no health center is near as complex as the lengthy email that I sent you late on Friday night. So if I ruined your President's Day holiday, I apologize, expecting more of those. But you suggested that marketing and fundraising are going to be carved out. Or is there a list of other things that when you see in the Medicare cost report, you will carve out of the calculation?
We'll put something together for you to review.
Okay, great.
Oh, and Sharon, thanks for putting that question in. That would be helpful to get that feedback about whether the DME, which DME costs. And you know, it comes to that definition of DME. I mean, at what point, where's that line between an incident to supply and, you know, and something that rises to the level of DME. When we were talking about this as a team, I was thinking back to when I was a teenager and always used to sprain my ankles, you know, once a month, and they'd give me an ACE bandage, you know, every time I would go to the sports medicine. And it's like, well, first people said, nobody keeps ACE bandages on hands anymore, but it's like, you know, back then, did anybody bill for an ACE bandage, or was it just an incident to thing that's just built into overhead?
I believe there's a code for it, so it is possible to be billed. You
can get it for $2.99 at CVS, which I think how most people do it today. But interesting to know that there is a code still.
So Peter or Jen, this is Chris Duty from up in Aroostook County. So and we appreciate your work in trying to get this done according to the time frame, but let's say we don't. You folks aren't ready, and there's legislation that very clearly says when this goes into effect, what would be the next steps?
Yep, I mean, we are shooting to hit it as close as we can, and I think that's all we can say at this point. I mean, we, as Peter said, he stole my line. We want to get this right. That's why we're continuing to have the conversations. That's why there are a lot of separate follow-up conversations, and we still do have some hope that we will hit it. If we don't, I think the consequence is that we will not be able to reimburse as of 3/1. I think, again, we're going to hit as close to that as we can.
I mean, and Chris, we would be talking a matter of days. It's not like, I mean, it really depends on how long it takes us to get these answers right. we're going to, Guidehouse is going to be in touch with the health centers, and we will be in touch with Kurt and Darcy and the rest of you, with that. And it's really coming down more to the Medicare cost reports and just making sure that we're really doing our due diligence about what should be in that numerator. But yeah, we're not talking about weeks and months. I mean, we're talking about like, okay, I mean, we cannot make a commitment about, does this mean March 4th or March 8th, but we are talking a matter of days rather than some protracted thing.
I mean, and again, our goal is to post a methodology that meets CMS requirements associated with the state plan. And so what may happen, and indeed is likely to happen, is that our Chapter 639 process of actually presenting the rates may be delayed. But if we are still able to meet that CMS posting deadline, that won't cause a delay. So that's our top priority. Again, we are very concerned about whether or not we'll be able to meet it, but I think if you are not hearing from us that we've scheduled a meeting to present rates, it still may be that we can meet that deadline and then have that conversation a little bit later, like in early March.
I guess where I was headed with it is, the legislation is pretty clear that I was trying to figure out, how would we get reimbursed as of a certain date if there was any type of a delay. And I would think all of us as FQHCs know that we can't bankroll for lots of long periods of time. And reconciliation could be rather interesting if there would be an overlap.
Yes, what you are describing is why we are highly motivated. So we hope we don't have to have that conversation, but we recognize that if we do, it's going to be a hard conversation.
So could you, I mean, have you, I'm an alumna of CMS. So you're saying you don't want to have a process where you kind of reconcile, at least in the first year? I mean, that is a possibility, I believe, in the spa world, but that's something that you don't want to pursue if you don't have to, I guess.
Can you say more about what that process would be? I don't know if I'm familiar with it.
So you could have a process where you say effective for dates of service on and after, March 1st, we're going to pay using this fee schedule that's in, and then you put in the web link. And for the first year or for the first 6 months, however you want, you could say, we're going to continue to pay the rate that was in effect prior to this period. And then by X date, we will make adjustments to the rate to reflect blah, blah, blah. I mean, that way you could meet your effective date deadline. And technically, I would think it might satisfy the state requirement. That's up to you, obviously. But and that would give you a little bit of breathing room to get it right or get something you're comfortable with. But is that something that you've rejected doing, or what's?
Yeah, I think Kristen may have an answer. I mean, I think that's what we're already contemplating, is coming forward with a methodology, and we need it to be a methodology that we feel confident that CMS will approve, even if it ends up being an interim methodology. So I think that's probably what we're already talking about doing. So, but we need to be able to describe it with, sufficient precision that CMS will acknowledge it as a methodology posting, even if it is interim. I don't know, Kristen, if that's accurate or if you have more to add to that.
Yeah, no, I'd say that's accurate. I mean, the barrier here really comes down to being able to comprehensively describe whatever that path forward is, and doing it in a way that meets the federal requirements, but is also within the prescribed timelines in order to do that noticing and submit the amendment. And because the implementation for this requirement is March 1, this amendment would have to be submitted by the end of March, which means that for all intents and purposes, we must complete all noticing requirements by the 28th. And so being able to have all of this solidified in a comprehensive manner that we can post to the web by the 28th, it's tight. We're still confident, but as Jenny said, you know, there may be some barriers that come out of some of these conversations that, you know, Guidehouse wants to have with each FQHC. That might delay little pieces, which in all actuality delays essentially the change in its entirety. But again, still pretty confident that we can meet it. But yeah, that's our barrier is those prescribed timelines and the level of detail needed in order to meet those prescribed timelines.
Jenka, your hand is up.
Hey, yeah, so I just wanted to call out that I put into the chat the section from Section 31 that talks about limited fee-for-service billing. That includes anything billable under Part B for Medicare. And then I separately included the CMS Benefit Policy Manual for Chapter 13, which also talks about laboratory services being billed fee-for-service. So that's where we're getting 83036 being able to be filed to limited fee-for-service for main care. And that would also include radiology.
Oops, I was muted, but I was saying thank you.
And just to answer Chris's question directly, the retroactivity application of any sort of change is really dependent on our ability to get that federal approval, which is and has to be consistent with those time frames and level of detail that I had just mentioned.
Right.
Okay,
if we post by 2/28 with sufficient precision, then yes, it will be retro to 3/1.
Thanks, Jen.
I'm looking for other raised hands and other questions in the chat. I'm not seeing any. We can certainly stay on a little longer. This has been a really helpful conversation from our perspective. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. So well, again, thank you. Thanks to everyone for joining and for all of the work that I know has gone into completing the supplemental cost reports. We really, really appreciate all of the work that everyone is putting in. And that is what has brought us to the point of remaining hopeful about meeting that deadline. And we do remain hopeful. So I think we will end the meeting. And we will be in touch as soon as we have additional information to share. And we do anticipate that we will, I think we've had some discussions. Once we have finalized the methodology, we'll be setting up a time to actually present it in accordance with the Chapter 639 process. And we will continue to endeavor to get information about in advance of those calls. I do think it's helpful for folks to have the opportunity to review information in advance, even if it is limited.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yep. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.